At 14:20 on November 2, 1944, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr felt his P-51D Mustang shudder as German anti-aircraft fire ripped through the engine over Czechoslovakia, 200 miles behind enemy lines. 20 years old, 37 combat missions, 5 confirmed kills. The Ninth Air Force had lost 23 pilots to flak over Czechoslovakia in October alone. Most never made it out of their cockpits. The ones who did faced something worse. German civilians had beaten 3 American airmen to death in the past month. The Wehrmacht took prisoners. The Gestapo took bodies. Carr's engine was dying, oil pressure dropping, temperature spiking. He had maybe 90 seconds before the Merlin seized completely. At 4,000 feet over enemy territory, he had one option. He pulled the canopy release, rolled the Mustang inverted, and fell into the freezing November sky. His parachute opened at 2,000 feet. Below him, the forests of Czechoslovakia stretched in every direction. No Allied positions, no friendly faces, just German-occupied territory and a 20-year-old pilot floating down into it. The P-51D he had named Angel's Playmate hit the ground 3 miles east and exploded on impact. Carr landed in a forest clearing, gathered his chute, and started moving west, toward France, toward his base, toward the 200 miles of enemy territory between him and safety. The first day, he covered 12 miles. No food, no water, just his flight suit, his .45 pistol, and the survival training that every fighter pilot hoped they would never need. He moved at night, hid during daylight, and listened to German patrols passing within yards of his hiding spots. By the third day, Bruce Carr was starving. His hands shook, his vision blurred. He had covered maybe 30 miles, which meant he had 170 left to go. At this rate, he would be dead before he reached the Rhine. Hypothermia, starvation, or a German patrol. One of the three would get him. On the morning of November 5th, Carr made a decision. He would surrender. Not to the Wehrmacht, not to the Gestapo, to the Luftwaffe. German pilots treated captured American airmen with professional respect, fighter pilot to fighter pilot. It was his best chance at surviving the war. He had watched German aircraft taking off and landing from a nearby airfield. Luftwaffe base. Focke-Wulf 190s lined up in dispersal areas among the trees. Ground crews working on engines. Fuel trucks moving between revetments. This was where he would turn himself in. Carr approached the perimeter fence at dusk. He planned to walk onto the base at first light, hands raised, and hoped the Luftwaffe pilots would take him prisoner before anyone else got to him. He found a spot in the tree line with a clear view of the nearest dispersal area and settled in to wait. That was when he saw it. 2 German mechanics finishing their work on a Focke-Wulf 190. They topped off the fuel tanks. They ran up the engine. They checked the controls. Then they walked away, leaving the aircraft sitting there in the darkness, fueled, armed, ready to fly. Bruce Carr stared at that German fighter for a long time. If you want to see how Carr's desperate plan turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more untold stories to life. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Carr. He was a 20-year-old American pilot with 37 missions and 5 kills. He had never sat in a German cockpit. He could not read German. He did not know where the starter was, how the throttle worked, or whether the guns were loaded. The Focke-Wulf 190 was one of the deadliest fighters in the Luftwaffe inventory. German pilots trained for months to fly it. Carr had until dawn to figure it out. By 0600, the base would be awake. By 0630, mechanics would be pre-flighting that aircraft. If he was going to steal a German fighter, he had exactly one chance, and if he failed, the Gestapo would make sure his death took a very long time. Carr waited until full darkness. 2,200 hours. The Luftwaffe base had settled into night routine. A few guards walking perimeter, lights in the barracks across the field. The dispersal area where the Focke-Wulf sat was empty. No mechanics, no pilots. Just one German fighter and the trees surrounding it. He moved through the fence where the wire had rusted at the bottom. Slowly, 1 inch at a time. Every sound amplified in the silence. His flight boots on frozen leaves. His breathing. His heartbeat pounding so loud he was certain the guards could hear it. The Focke-Wulf 190 sat 20 yards from the tree line. Carr crossed that distance in a crouch, expecting a shout or a gunshot with every step. Neither came. He reached the wing, paused, listened. Nothing. He pulled himself onto the wing root and slid into the cockpit. The smell hit him first. Aviation fuel, gun oil, leather. The cockpit was smaller than his Mustang, tighter. The instrument panel covered in gauges he could not read. Every label in German, every switch unmarked in any language he understood. In the darkness, he could barely see the outlines of the controls. Carr had flown P-40 Warhawks, P-51 Mustangs, American aircraft with American instruments and American engineering. The Focke-Wulf was German engineering at its finest. The instrument layout was completely different. The throttle quadrant was on the left, not the right. The stick felt heavier. The rudder pedals sat at a different angle. He started memorizing by touch. This switch here, that lever there. The throttle, the mixture, the propeller control. Except the Focke-Wulf did not have separate controls for mixture and propeller. It had something the Germans called the Kommandogerät. One single lever that controlled everything. Throttle, mixture, propeller pitch, supercharger, all managed automatically by a mechanical computer built into the engine. It was the most advanced throttle system on any fighter aircraft in the world, and it was the only reason Carr had any chance at all. In a Mustang, a pilot who did not know the systems would crash on takeoff trying to manage 5 different controls simultaneously. In the Focke-Wulf, he only had to manage one, the starter. He needed to find the starter. His fingers traced the right side of the cockpit. A T-shaped handle with German text he could not read. He memorized its position. Pull or push. He would find out at dawn. Landing gear lever, flap controls. He found them by shape and location, comparing them to what he knew from American aircraft. Similar enough, maybe. The canopy release was obvious. The gun sight he would not need. He was not planning to fight. He was planning to run. 4 hours until dawn. Carr sat in that German cockpit, in the darkness, on an enemy airfield, memorizing every control he could find by touch alone. His hands were shaking, partly from cold, partly from fear, partly from the simple mathematics of what he was attempting. If the engine did not start, he would be captured in a German cockpit. If the engine started, but he could not control the aircraft, he would crash and die. If he managed to take off but flew the wrong direction, he would run out of fuel over enemy territory. If he flew the right direction, every German gun between Czechoslovakia and France would try to shoot him down. And if he somehow made it to Allied lines, every American gun would try to shoot him down too. A Focke-Wulf with German markings approaching an American airfield. The mathematics said he should die. Every variable pointed toward failure. But the alternative was surrender, prison camp, and hoping the war ended before he starved to death behind German wire. At 05:30, the sky began to lighten. Carr heard voices in the distance, German voices. The base was waking up. Mechanics would arrive at the dispersal area within 30 minutes, maybe less. He found the T-handle. He placed his fingers around it, and he pushed. Nothing happened. Carr pushed the T-handle again. Still nothing. His mind raced through possibilities. Wrong control, wrong direction, dead battery, disabled aircraft. Every second that passed brought the German mechanics closer. He reversed direction, pulled the handle instead of pushing. A high-pitched whine filled the cockpit, an inertia starter spooling up somewhere in the engine compartment. The sound grew louder, higher, building toward something. Carr pulled the handle back toward his body. The BMW 801 engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. 14 cylinders producing nearly 2,000 horsepower. The entire aircraft shook with the power of it. Smoke and exhaust blasted backward. The propeller became a blur. Somewhere on the airfield, Germans were shouting. Carr did not wait to find out what they were saying. He released the brakes and shoved the throttle forward. The Focke-Wulf lunged ahead like an animal. The acceleration pressed him back into the seat. He had no idea which direction the runway was. He did not care. Ahead of him was a gap between 2 empty hangar foundations, wide enough for the wingspan. Maybe. The German fighter screamed across the grass at 70 miles per hour, 80, 90. The gap between the hangars rushed toward him. Carr pulled back on the stick and felt the wheels leave the ground. The wingtips cleared the hangar walls by what felt like inches, probably was inches. He was airborne, in a stolen Focke-Wulf, over a Luftwaffe base that was now fully awake and very confused. Carr banked hard left and dropped to treetop level. At this altitude, German anti-aircraft guns could not depress low enough to track him. He pushed the throttle to maximum and headed west, toward France, toward the Allied lines. 200 miles of enemy territory at 350 miles per hour. The Kommandogerät did exactly what the German engineers had designed it to do. As Carr pushed the throttle, the system automatically adjusted mixture, propeller pitch, and supercharger. He did not need to manage anything except direction and altitude. The German technology was saving an American pilot's life. He flew at 50 feet, sometimes lower, following terrain, dodging church steeples and power lines. The countryside blurred beneath him at nearly 6 miles per minute. German soldiers on the ground looked up in confusion as a Luftwaffe fighter screamed overhead at maximum speed, heading the wrong direction. After 90 minutes, Carr crossed into Allied-controlled territory. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt the first bullets punching through his aircraft. American anti-aircraft guns opened fire the moment they saw German markings. Tracers streaked past the cockpit. Carr felt impacts in the fuselage. He was too low to bail out, too fast to land, and flying an enemy aircraft that every gunner in France had been trained to destroy. He pointed the Focke-Wulf toward his home base at Ansbach and pushed the throttle harder. The engine screamed. More tracers, more impacts. The Americans were getting better at tracking him. He was 20 miles from safety, and every mile brought more guns. Ansbach appeared ahead. The runway, the dispersal areas. American P-51s lined up in rows. His squadron, his base, his people, and they were uncovering the 40mm anti-aircraft guns. Carr pulled up hard, chopped the throttle, and tried to configure for landing. He needed to get this aircraft on the ground before his own base shot him out of the sky. He reached for the landing gear lever and pushed. Nothing happened. He pushed again. The gear refused to extend. Something in the hydraulic system had failed. Battle damage from American guns. German maintenance issue. It did not matter. He was out of altitude, out of options, and out of time. Below him, American gunners were taking aim at a German fighter making an unauthorized approach. Carr had no radio, no way to tell them who he was, no way to stop what was about to happen. Carr did the only thing he could. He shoved the stick forward, dove for the runway, and belly landed the Focke-Wulf at 120 miles per hour. Metal screamed against concrete. Sparks erupted beneath the fuselage. The propeller hit the ground and shattered. The aircraft slid 500 feet down the runway, shedding pieces of German engineering with every yard. When it finally stopped, Carr was still alive. Barely. He tried to open the canopy. His hands would not work. 3 days of starvation, hypothermia, and adrenaline had finally caught up with him. He sat in the smoking cockpit of a German fighter on an American airfield, too exhausted to move. Military police arrived within seconds. They saw German markings. They saw a pilot in the cockpit. They climbed onto the wings and started pulling at him, trying to drag out what they assumed was a Luftwaffe pilot who had just crash-landed on their base. Carr was still strapped in. The MPs pulled harder. He could not undo the buckle. His fingers had no strength left. The soldiers were shouting. He was shouting back. Nobody could understand anyone. The situation was 30 seconds from becoming a tragedy. Then a face appeared in front of the cockpit. Colonel George Bickel, commander of the 354th Fighter Group, Carr's commanding officer, the man who had watched one of his pilots disappear over Czechoslovakia 3 days earlier. Bickel stared at the exhausted, filthy, half-frozen lieutenant sitting in a German cockpit. The MPs stopped pulling. The shouting stopped. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Bickel shook his head and walked away. The MPs helped Carr out of the cockpit. Medics took him to the infirmary. Within an hour, he was drinking hot coffee and eating his first meal in 3 days. The Focke-Wulf sat on the runway for 2 days before intelligence officers towed it away for evaluation. Carr had delivered them a nearly intact German fighter. The aircraft showed battle damage from American anti-aircraft fire, but the engine, the Kommandogerät, and most of the instruments were still functional. Intelligence teams spent weeks studying the systems. The Army Air Forces issued an order shortly afterward: no more stealing German aircraft. A special unit was already collecting enemy planes for testing. Pilots who acquired German aircraft without authorization were creating confusion and risking friendly fire incidents. The order was direct and unambiguous. Carr returned to flying status within a week. New P-51D, new missions. The same aggressive flying style that had earned him the label that his superiors had used since his first days in combat. The label that had followed him from the 363rd Fighter Group to the 354th. The label that would define his entire career. By December, he had added 2 more kills to his record. By February 1945, he had 7 confirmed victories. The 20-year-old pilot who had stolen a German fighter was becoming one of the most effective pilots in the 9th Air Force. But Bruce Carr was not satisfied with 7 kills. He was not satisfied with being an ace. Every mission, he pushed harder, flew lower, attacked targets that other pilots avoided. His gun camera footage showed enemy aircraft filling the entire frame before he opened fire. Point-blank range, maximum aggression, minimum margin for error. In March 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final months. Germany was collapsing. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel, pilots, and aircraft. But they were not finished. German fighters still rose to defend the Reich, and they were still dangerous. On the morning of April 2, 1945, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr led a flight of 4 P-51 Mustangs on an armed reconnaissance mission near Schweinfurt, Germany. They were hunting ground targets, trucks, trains, anything that moved. What they found instead was 60 German fighters flying 5,000 feet above them, and Carr made a decision that defied every rule of air combat. Standard tactical doctrine was clear. Never attack an enemy formation that outnumbers you 15-1. Never attack from below when the enemy holds altitude advantage. Never engage when surprise is impossible. Every rule said the same thing: disengage, report the contact, let someone else handle it. Carr ignored every rule. He pushed his throttle forward, pulled back on the stick, and climbed directly towards 60 German fighters. His 3 wingmen followed. 4 P-51 Mustangs climbing toward a formation of Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s that stretched across the sky like a wall of iron crosses. The German formation was heading west, probably targeting American bombers somewhere over the Reich. The pilots were focused on their mission. They were not expecting 4 American fighters to climb straight into them from below. The attack made no tactical sense. That was exactly why it worked. Carr's Mustang reached the rear of the German formation at 380 miles per hour. He picked the trailing aircraft, a Focke-Wulf 190 flying slightly below the main group. The German pilot never saw him coming. Carr opened fire at 200 yards. The Focke-Wulf exploded. First kill. He did not slow down. He slid behind the next aircraft in line. Another Focke-Wulf. Another burst of 50 caliber rounds. The German fighter rolled over and fell toward the earth trailing black smoke. Second kill. The formation was reacting now. German pilots braking left and right, radio calls flooding the frequency. 60 aircraft trying to figure out what was happening behind them. Carr kept pushing forward, into the formation, through the chaos. A Messerschmitt 109 crossed in front of him. Carr pulled lead and fired. The German fighter came apart in midair, pieces of wing and fuselage spinning away. Third kill. His wingmen were scoring their own victories. The German formation had dissolved into individual dogfights, aircraft spinning and diving in every direction, tracers crisscrossing the sky. The numerical advantage meant nothing when the enemy could not coordinate. Carr found another Messerschmitt trying to dive away. He followed it down, closing the distance, waiting until the German aircraft filled his gun sight. He pressed the trigger. The 109 burst into flames. Fourth kill. One more. He needed one more to become an ace in a single day, the rarest achievement in fighter combat. Dozens of pilots had done it earlier in the war when targets were plentiful, but by April 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. German aircraft were scarce. Opportunities like this almost never happened. Carr scanned the chaos around him. There, a Messerschmitt 109 pulling up from a dive, trying to regain altitude. The German pilot was focused on escaping, not fighting. He did not see the P-51 sliding into position behind him. Carr closed to 150 yards, point-blank range for aerial combat. He could see the rivets on the German fuselage, the black crosses on the wings, the pilot's head moving in the cockpit, looking everywhere except behind him. The 50 caliber guns roared. The Messerschmitt shuddered as rounds tore through the engine cowling. Fire erupted from the exhaust stacks. The aircraft rolled slowly onto its back and fell. Fifth kill. First Lieutenant Bruce Carr had just become an ace in a day. 5 confirmed victories in a single mission, the last American pilot to achieve this in the European theater of operations. The entire engagement had lasted 11 minutes. 4 P-51s had attacked 60 German fighters and destroyed 15 of them without losing a single aircraft. Carr alone had killed 5 and damaged a 6th. The surviving German aircraft scattered in every direction. The bombers they had been sent to intercept would reach their targets unopposed, because one pilot decided that 15-to-1 odds were acceptable. The flight turned west and headed for home. Carr checked his fuel, checked his ammunition, checked his wingmen. Everyone was still flying. It seemed impossible. It was impossible. But it had happened anyway. The 4 Mustangs landed at Ansbach at 11:40. Ground crews counted the bullet holes in each aircraft. Carr's P-51 had taken 7 hits. Minor damage, nothing that would keep it from flying again tomorrow. Debriefing lasted 2 hours. Intelligence officers reviewed gun camera footage. They confirmed each kill. 5 for Carr, 10 more split among his wingmen. 15 German aircraft destroyed in 11 minutes of combat. The officers kept asking the same question in different ways. Why did you attack a force that outnumbered you 15-to-1? Carr's answer was simple. The Germans were heading toward American bombers. Someone had to stop them. He had ammunition and fuel. The tactical situation favored aggression. He attacked. The intelligence officers wrote down his words. They did not write down what they were thinking. That no tactical manual in any air force recommended attacking 60 enemy fighters with 4 aircraft. That the mathematics of aerial combat did not support the outcome. That First Lieutenant Bruce Carr had done something that should have been impossible. Word spread through the 354th Fighter Group within hours. The pilot who had stolen a German fighter 5 months earlier had just become an ace in a day. The last ace in a day in the entire European theater. The combination was unprecedented. No other American pilot had both achievements on his record. 1 week later, on April 9th, Carr received his promotion to captain. 21 years old, 14 confirmed kills, 1 stolen enemy aircraft, and now a silver bar on his collar. The promotion came with new responsibilities, more missions, more targets. The war was ending, but the killing was not. German resistance continued through April. The Luftwaffe sent up fewer aircraft each day, but the ones they sent were often flown by experienced pilots with nothing left to lose. Carr flew every mission he could. April 10th, April 15th, April 20th. Each sortie brought new targets. Trains, convoys, the occasional German aircraft that rose to challenge them. He added 2 more kills to his record before the month ended. His last aerial victories came on April 25, 1945. 2 German fighters destroyed over what remained of the Reich. The war had 13 days left. Carr did not know that. He only knew that there were still enemies in the sky, and he still had ammunition. May 8th. Victory in Europe. The German surrender was signed at Reims. The guns fell silent. The skies over Germany belonged to the Allies. Captain Bruce Carr had flown 172 combat missions. He had confirmed 14 or 15 aerial victories, depending on which records you consulted. He had destroyed dozens more enemy aircraft on the ground. He had been shot down once and escaped by stealing an enemy fighter. He had attacked 60 German aircraft with 3 wingmen and won. He was 21 years old. The 354th Fighter Group began standing down. Pilots received orders for reassignment or discharge. The war in the Pacific was still ongoing, but Germany was finished. Some men wanted to go home. Some wanted to keep fighting. Carr belonged to the second group. But the Army Air Forces had other plans for their aces. Experienced combat pilots were valuable, too valuable to risk in continued operations. They were needed for training, for recruitment, for the public relations machinery that would shape how America remembered the war. Carr received orders in June. He was being assigned to a new unit, not a combat squadron, a demonstration team, the Acrojets, America's first jet-powered aerobatic team, flying the new P-80 Shooting Star at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. The war was over. The flying was not. And Bruce Carr was about to discover that peacetime brought challenges that combat had never prepared him for. He was a fighter pilot without a war. For now. The Distinguished Service Cross arrived in May 1945, the nation's second highest award for valor in combat. The citation described the action over Schweinfurt in precise military language, leading 4 aircraft against more than 60 enemy fighters, completely disregarding personal safety, destroying 5 enemy aircraft and damaging a 6th. Extraordinary heroism. General Orders No. 55 from Headquarters United States Strategic Forces in Europe, dated May 27, 1945. Captain Bruce Ward Carr, Distinguished Service Cross. The paperwork made official what his squadron already knew. Their most aggressive pilot had earned his place among the most decorated airmen of the war. The Acrojets assignment lasted through 1946. Carr flew the P-80 Shooting Star in formation demonstrations across the American Southwest. The jet age had arrived. Propellers were becoming obsolete. The skills that had made him deadly in a Mustang needed translation to aircraft that flew twice as fast. He adapted. He always adapted. That was what made him different from pilots who peaked in one aircraft or one war. Carr learned the jets the same way he had learned the Focke-Wulf, by sitting in the cockpit, by memorizing the controls, by pushing the limits until he understood what the machine could do. Korea came in 1950, the first jet war, MiG Alley. Chinese pilots flying Soviet aircraft against American F-86 Sabres. Carr requested combat assignment. The Air Force sent him to the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Kimpo Air Base in South Korea. He flew 57 combat missions over Korea. Different war, different enemy, different aircraft. Same pilot. The man who had stolen a German fighter and attacked 60 aircraft with 4 was now hunting MiGs over the Yalu River. He did not achieve ace status in Korea. Few pilots did. The MiG-15 was a formidable opponent, and the rules of engagement limited pursuit across the Chinese border. After Korea, Carr took command of the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Misawa Air Base in Japan. Leadership now, not just flying. The aggressive young lieutenant had become a squadron commander, responsible for dozens of pilots and aircraft. The transition required skills that combat never taught: administration, politics, patience. He served through the 1950s and early 60s, the Cold War, nuclear deterrence, the constant readiness for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Carr trained pilots who would never see the kind of combat he had experienced. He wondered sometimes if they understood what air war actually meant. Vietnam answered that question. In November 1968, Colonel Bruce Carr deployed to Tuy Hoa Air Base in South Vietnam. 44 years old, flying the F-100 Super Sabre, close air support missions, bombing and strafing runs in support of ground troops. A different kind of war than the ones he had known before. He flew 286 combat missions over Vietnam, more than he had flown in World War II. The targets were different: jungle trails instead of German factories, supply convoys instead of Luftwaffe formations. But the danger was the same: anti-aircraft fire, surface-to-air missiles, the constant possibility that any mission could be the last. The Air Force awarded him the Legion of Merit for his service in Vietnam. 3 more Distinguished Flying Crosses joined his collection. By the time he rotated back to the United States in November 1969, Colonel Bruce Carr had accumulated more than 500 combat missions across 3 wars. He retired from the Air Force in 1973. 31 years of service, 3 wars, 14 aerial victories, 1 stolen enemy aircraft, more decorations than most pilots earned in a lifetime. The retirement was quiet. No ceremonies, no speeches, Just a pilot walking away from the only life he had known since he was 15 years old. Bruce Carr settled in Florida. He kept flying. Not combat, not demonstrations, just flying. Because that was who he was. In retirement, Bruce Carr did what he had always done. He flew. Through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, he remained in the cockpit. Air shows, private flights, anything that kept him in the air. The man who had learned to fly at 15 never stopped. In 1997, at 73 years old, Carr visited the Fantasy of Flight Museum in Florida. He arrived the way he had arrived at every airfield for 50 years, flying. A P-51 Mustang screamed over the crowd at 300 knots and 50 feet before breaking into a perfect approach. The spectators watched an elderly man climb out of the cockpit. Most had no idea they were looking at one of the most decorated pilots in American history. He spent hours talking with visitors that day. Young pilots who wanted to know what air combat was really like. Veterans who remembered the war. Children who had never seen a propeller-driven fighter. Carr answered every question. He signed autographs, he posed for photographs. He never mentioned the Distinguished Service Cross or the stolen Focke-Wulf, unless someone asked. The cancer diagnosis came in 1997, prostate cancer, the same disease that claimed thousands of men his age every year. Carr faced it the way he had faced German fighters and Korean MiGs and Vietnamese anti-aircraft fire, without complaint, without drama. Just another mission. He died on April 25, 1998, 74 years old, 53 years to the day after his final aerial victories over Germany. The coincidence was too precise to ignore, as if the universe had decided to bookend his combat career with a single date. Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, the same ground that holds presidents and generals and Medal of Honor recipients. Bruce Ward Carr rests among them. A white marble headstone marks the spot. Colonel, United States Air Force. The dates of his birth and death. Nothing about the stolen fighter. Nothing about the 60 Germans. Nothing about the 3 wars and 500 missions. The headstone does not need to tell those stories. The records tell them. The gun camera footage tells them. The men who flew with him told them for as long as they lived. The 354th Fighter Group held reunions for decades after the war. The pilots who survived gathered to remember the ones who did not. They told stories about missions and aircraft and the moments that defined them. Carr's name came up at every reunion. The pilot who stole a Focke-Wulf. The pilot who attacked 60 Germans with 4 Mustangs. The pilot who never stopped being aggressive. Today, the 354th survives as the 354th Fighter Wing at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. They fly F-35 Lightning IIs now, stealth fighters with capabilities that Carr could never have imagined when he was dodging church steeples in a stolen German aircraft. But the lineage remains unbroken. The pilots who fly those F-35s inherit a tradition that Bruce Carr helped build. Some stories survive because they appear in official histories. Some survive because Hollywood makes movies about them. Bruce Carr's story survives because it represents something that cannot be taught in flight school or written in tactical manuals. The willingness to act when action seems impossible. The refusal to accept odds that mathematics says you cannot beat. He was a 15-year-old who decided to fly, a 20-year-old who stole an enemy fighter, a 21-year-old who attacked 60 aircraft with 4, a 73-year-old who still flew Mustangs at 300 knots. Bruce Carr spent his entire life doing what everyone said could not be done. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who escaped with stolen fighters and attacked impossible odds. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Bruce Carr doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.